Welcome, everybody, to the Back to Business School webinar series. This is a three-part series featuring each of your uh, respective Poetica team members. The first in the series today is being led by our lead designer, Nicole Suchin, and she's going to be talking through some branding strategies and fundamentals and really give you some tools and insights that should help you build your brand today, tomorrow, and in the future. Next week, same time on Wednesday, I will be leading a session on marketing, especially marketing strategies for Q4 and into 2025 to give you some ideas to help you finish off the year strong. We're also going to take a sort of state of the union on marketing in general. So, how has AI disrupted marketing for better and for worse? And what does that mean for you? And what kind of insights can you take away from that? And then the following week, Regina, our event strategist, is going to talk about event planning and coordination from a tactical perspective. So, how can you make events and event coordination a meaningful part of your overall marketing strategy? And how can you use events to really grow your brand, not just in Q4, but in the years ahead? So if you haven't signed up for all of the sessions, you can still do so. There's plenty of time left. But without further ado, I'm going to kick things over to Nicole to talk about some really fun ideas and insights about branding. So take it away, Nicole.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pat, for queuing this all up. As he said, we're going to get diving into some brand strategy fundamentals here. So, first off, quick overview. We're going to talk about basics of branding. We're going to dig into some very interesting and relevant case studies that are happening right now. And we're also going to talk about how you can brand better, whether I know we have some designers, we have some business owners. So both of you can take something away about how to really get into building out a brand strategy that's successful. Before I dive in, as Pat said, we are Poetica. We like to call ourselves your storytellers because each of us specialize in strategizing in a few different areas. As Pat said, he is our founder and creative director. So he specializes in copywriting, in marketing, and also all angles of your marketing approach. Regina is our event strategist. So she specializes in crafting and creating events that really engage with the community and engage with the audience you're wanting to approach. And lastly, I am the lead designer here at Poetica, and I specialize in telling your story through visuals. So I highly try to focus on specializing in making strategic visuals that focus on the user first. So, all of that said, let's dive into some branding fundamentals. So, first, I want to hit on three core points about why talking about branding is super important. So, firstly, I'd say the biggest thing is most people, especially business owners, misunderstand what branding is. Secondly, I would say a failed brand or a failed rebrand, as we're going to look at in a moment, can have a lasting impact on your business's reputation and really affect your audience's perception of you as a business. And then lastly, I personally agree that every business has a brand, whether they realize it or not, or whether they've invested any time into it. But not every business has one that is truly working to their advantage. So let's look at these a little closer. First, what do we want to say about most people misunderstand what branding is? I would say most people, when they hear branding, especially if it's from a designer, they think about brand guides, they think about visual identities, they think about logos, color palettes, maybe a mascot or something of that sort. However, a brand is not just those things. It's not just a spokesperson, it's not just a logo. It's not even just a single or series of campaigns that you're doing or a name like Gucci or Chanel. Those are pieces that build out your brand, but they are themselves not the brand. Secondly, let's talk about how a failed brand or a failed rebrand in this case can have a lasting impact on your business's reputation. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard in the news cycle, everyone was freaking out because Cracker Barrel just did this big rebrand. They totally changed their logo, they changed their interiors, and a lot of people were upset about it. And Cracker Barrel even dropped in stock. They lost tons of money. It was a huge debacle. But I want to talk a little bit about getting into why did it fail exactly? Because if you look here and you look at Cracker Barrel's branding or their visual identity, and you look at their interior, especially if you have a design mind, you might say it's very clean, it's very crisp. They got rid of a lot of the visual clutter, but everyone was against it. So I'm curious, feel free even to interject or drop in the chat. Like, why do you think this rebrand had such a big negative reaction? And feel free to drop some note in the chat or unmute yourself if you're able. Somebody said it's too clean and corporate. That's a good one. Someone said, or Elaine said, it was a big change for most people who are used to how it was. Erica said it takes away from their old timey country feel and looks too modern. All wonderful answers, and I would say all of you are right. It does take away from their old timey country feel. It is a big change, and it's very clean. So why is clean such a negative in this context? And I would say the answer is a lot deeper than we even realize on the surface. So, did you know that there's actually an entire field of study called neuromarketing? And it is dedicated to studying the psychological and emotional reaction that audiences have on various marketing tactics. From these studies, they've found that people's relationship with a brand can create positive or negative emotional or psychological reactions. So, one study found that people form a relational attachment to brands and very strong emotional relational attachments. And this can even lead to a sense of separation anxiety if they're distanced from a brand or they feel a disconnect from a brand that they used to love. Another study showed that people's brain chemistry is affected by the positive and negative emotive brand spirit experience. So they revealed basically that whenever you are interacting with a brand, let's say it's Cracker Barrel, and you're going in and you just feel this like homey classic country vibe when you walk in, you're feeling real good, you're feeling real cozy, and you are actually forming a brand brain connection where the emotional experience that you're feeling walking into a Cracker Barrel, which was crafted to make you feel that way, will bypass your logical decision making and cause you to make emotional purchases or emotional decisions. So Cracker Barrel is really clever where they have that little shop in the opening. So you have to walk through the gift shop. You have to walk out of the gift shop. So once you have your, nice country style meal, you might be kind of like, I'm feeling good. Maybe I'll buy, a chocolate bar. Maybe I'll get a sweater for myself. And you're just getting this like high off of the emotional experience that was crafted specifically to make you feel that way and to make you want to purchase. Lastly, other studies have found that the modern consumer craves human-centered branding, especially in their purchasing decisions. As far as or as high as 83% of customers are demanding more human interaction from brands. And I would argue this is largely because of the introduction of AI in a lot of our purchasing journeys. And Gen Z is actually the largest audience that's asking for this. So each of these things are pieces of why I would say Cracker Barrel's rebrand failed. It's not just because they took away specific elements. It's not just because, they took away the old grandpa and the logo. It's because they underestimated their audience's relational attachment to their brand. They stripped away the emotional connections, which gave you that nostalgic feeling. They rebranded in a way that was very unexpected. There was no prior warning, there were no talks in the news cycle like, hey, Cracker Barrel's doing a rebrand. And this created change that its audience did not expect nor evidently desire, which resulted in such distress and anxiety in its audience. And lastly, they removed the human elements of its branding, which is what makes it feel so lifeless and so empty rather than the positive view of what clean and modern often would make you feel. So, all things to think about, especially when it comes to branding and rebranding. And then the last piece that I want to touch on why having conversations around branding is so important is that every brand has a brand, whether they realize it or not. And like I said, it might not always be working for them. I think a lot of people confuse a brand with a visual identity. They think they have a logo and they're good to go. They're like, that's my brand. My brand is my logo. But really, what a brand is not just that one thing. It is the relationship that your audience has with your business. It's the emotional and psychological reactions that they're having when they engage with pieces of your business, whether that's seeing it, actually making a purchase, or going through an experience that is presented by your business. And I would say brand strategy is the foundation of all other business strategies, including marketing, design, advertising, and more. So, all of that is to kind of set us up to talk through a few real world examples. So, I've talked about why branding is important. Now, let's see it in the real world. What are some of the branding mistakes or successes that we're seeing out there, and how can you kind of learn from their strategies to start crafting one of your own? Next, I want to talk about another very relevant topic, which is what I'm going to call this, honestly, not even the Sydney Sweeney campaign. I'm calling it the Great Denim Brand War because Sydney Sweeney was just the beginning of a couple other campaigns related to denim that really caused more stir around this whole brand partnership and denim and what these companies are doing. So, if you haven't heard, Sydney Sweeney just partnered with American Eagle and they did this Sydney Sweeney Has Great Genes campaign where it was talking about genes are passed down from parents to offspring. And she says at the end, like, my genes are blue, referring to the denim that she's wearing. And a lot of people took this and ran with them saying, oh, so you're saying blonde hair and blue eyes is the ultimate gene. But so that was a bit kind of spun out a little bit. But I want to talk a little bit more about how this is not just a copy faux pas, it's actually a very strategic branding approach that either they were trying to do or they were maybe misunderstanding what their audience wanted. So before we get into the main campaign, I want to talk about AE as a brand. So if you look at American Eagle, they've had very minimal logo changes over time. Their copy often focuses on the buyer, which is you. So you'll see a lot of their slogans say, like, live your life. Great genes made for you, what you want in your gene. Their audience is typically quoted to be between the ages of 15 and 25. Right now, that's Gen Alpha to Gen Z, which is crazy to me because I'm Gen Z. And I was like, Gen Alpha's 15 now. What's going on? So they have that core audience. And they also are known to have this kind of classic Americana aesthetic. And they usually leverage celebrities that are very relevant to their audiences. So they've done a lot, I would say several times a year, they do a big campaign with a celebrity that is very relevant to their core audience. A couple years back, they did one with Addison Rae. They did one with Jenna Ortega. They did a bunch with Outer Banks crew. And they're always putting them in this very authentic environment that feels very natural so that you as the buyer would look at it and go, oh, that's my favorite celebrity. And hey, they're wearing American Eagle jeans. And hey, they kind of look like me. So they're very strategic in how they frame a lot of their celebrities and how they frame their copy to really focus on you, the buyer. Now let's look at Sydney's brand. So she's also just like a newer actress that's entered the scene. So her brand could evolve over time, but right now I would say a lot of her branding highlights her in a more provocative light. She's known for breakout roles like Euphoria, and she fits that classic Hollywood blonde bombshell aesthetic. And interestingly, the majority of her roles would fit into television that targets more the mid to older range of Gen Z and even the millennial range. She was recently in a couple rom-coms. She was recently in a film called The American or just Americana. So it's interesting to me that they chose such an older, and that's not like she's like super old, but like an older actress as opposed to their usual young, youthful, innocent looking brand partners. Now, if we look at the results of the campaign, I would say a lot of it is still a little inconclusive. American Eagle will tell you they're booming. Other sources will tell you they're not. A lot of people pandered it for being white supremacist. It really got into the news cycle on a negative note. People saying it was uncomfortable and all different things like that. And I would compare the kind of low to unknown status of the campaign to two much more successful campaigns right out the gate, which would be Gap and Cat's Eye, as well as Beyonce and Levi jeans. So if you look at the stats there, I mean, the Gap and Cat's Eye YouTube video went viral like instantly. It has 400 million views. It's still going up and up. And both brands are doing incredibly well. And we're even lauded for female empowerment, diversity. A lot of people were taking the Gap and Cat's Eye video and being like, this is what you're supposed to do, American Eagle. Like, this is what people want. And if even I was even on their Instagram the other day and people were like commenting with gifs of the video to kind of be like, you don't know what you're doing, guys, to kind of like compare the two. So, with that all in mind, where do we think AE missed the mark? I would say if they were trying to target a younger audience, the Gen Alpha to young Gen Z audience, it's strange that they chose Sydney because she's not that relevant to that younger audience. And she doesn't have a very strong identity. I would argue that a better choice would maybe be Sabrina Carpenter, especially because Sabrina's whole brand is built around her being, yes, like a blonde bombshell, but also she uses a lot of comedy in her like more provocative uh music videos and things like that. It's always mixed in with this layer of ha ha, she's kind of a dumb blonde or she's kind of ditzy. And I think the backlash would not have been as intense because it would have translated as more comedic rather than so serious as it was. So in that sense, I would say they chose a partner that also didn't fit the right tone. And then lastly, I feel like it was interesting that they chose a lot more, and it wasn't highly provocative, but slightly more provocative poses and imagery for Sydney, which feels very out of place compared to their usual cool and youthful approach. So most would say that AE failed, but I would argue, did they really miss the mark? Because if you look at the stats and even AE's own claims, many polls have come out saying that a younger millennial and older Gen Z audience actually appreciated the ads and they thought it was perfectly appropriate, with many even comparing it to the Brooke Shields campaign for Calvin Klein back in 1980, which many older millennials would recognize and remember. So it's possible, and we can't know for sure, that AE was targeting an older market audience. And this is merely the beginning of them moving on to more mature brand partnerships, which shifts them into that older audience bracket. However, if that was not their intention, then I would agree that they definitely failed to meet the mark with that younger audience that they've been known for so long. So here's some lessons that we can kind of take away from this. One, I would say branding is more than just one campaign, but it could be the beginning of major change within a brand. Secondly, many of the results of a brand strategy do depend on public perception. So, what your target audience wants is most important. And then, thirdly, messaging, visual choices, and tone are not in themselves branding, but they are pieces that can affect a brand's reputation, especially in how it's being perceived to the general audience. All food for thought. I want to move on to a slightly smaller brand. So, a lot of times when we think about branding, we think about the large corporations. We think about Chanel, we think about Gucci, we might think about Nike, but sometimes that intimidates smaller business owners because they feel like branding is like a Fortune 500 company pursuit. You need millions of dollars if you're going to do a rebrand. And I would say that that's not necessarily true. You can do a successful brand strategy no matter the scale of your company. What's most important is really knowing your audience and niching down enough that you can craft visuals and a brand style that is appealing to the audience that you have in mind. One business that Pat and I really like is this one called Freeburn that we recently came across. And for you ask, yes, they are attorneys, and some of them do ride motorcycles, but that is not their whole thing. They are actually attorneys that help motorcyclists specifically. So they are being extremely clear throughout their marketing and their brand visual guide, their website, that their audience is motorcyclists and they support and want to educate and want to help motorcyclists with their legal needs as much as they possibly can. So, beyond just their visual style, they're genuinely involved in their audience's community. Every team member belongs to a motorcycle organization and they host many events that are either just, hangouts with other motorcyclists or educational focused that are super relevant to what that audience wants and needs. So they're using that as a way to draw that audience in. And then lastly, throughout a lot of their copy and a lot of the approach that they take with their visuals, they understand what their audience really needs because they themselves have been there. So notice how all these different points, again, we're focusing back onto the audience. They are really digging deep on what that audience needs, what that audience wants, and how they can relate closer to that audience. So I would say this teaches us that small businesses can succeed, one, by having a super distinct and clear audience. And then secondly, getting directly involved in that audience, getting in front of that audience in ways that is going to draw them in and really make them feel like you're part of the crowd. And then lastly, offering resources and education that their audience values. So one thing that Freeburn does is they have a whole collection of videos on their website and on their YouTube channel where they're educating motorcyclists about different things to understand in the legal world. And they have tons of this, and they've even won a couple awards for how much education they've given away, and they're highly rated because of it. One last brand strategy that I want to bring up. So I want to talk a little bit about the research aspect of branding in this last one. And this is one that we did within Poetica. So one thing that I want to note before we jump into this is with American Eagle and Levi and Cat's Eye and Gap, They are very much focused on the buyer. Everything is geared in to make you feel like you have a personal connection with this brand. And everything is framed that way. That's more about you. Same with Freeburn. It's very much about you, the audience, and what you need and how Freeburn can be a educational or supportive partner in your journey. So there's slight differences there where AE simply needs to craft a product that is appealing to their audience, whereas Freeburn is crafting experiences and services that they specifically have expertise in that can help their audience. And then with this one that we did with Waylight Psychological, we actually focused more on Chelsea because her services were very specific to her approach as a psychologist. So while we do want to keep the audience at the forefront, there are times, especially if you're a business that is focused more on you as the individual, that you need to also dig into your personal identity. So one of the things that we, or a few of the things actually that we did for Chelsea, is we dug into some in-depth interviews. We talked to her about her experience, why she is a psychologist, what got her there, her education, and what made her a unique option for her ideal client. Next, we did some in-depth studies on words to choose. So originally when she came to us, she was actually just Chelsea Grief Consulting or Chelsea Grief Psychological. And she had even told us, she's like, I know that it's very distant. It doesn't really say much to it. How can we make it feel a little more emotive? And so we did a bunch of studies where we actually uncovered uh, her mother's name or her grandmother's name was Lumina, and that meant guiding light. And that was a very meaningful thing to her. And it was very, it had an emotional connection for her. And so we're like, okay, guiding light. Well, in a lot of ways, with your practice, you're doing a very similar thing as you're guiding people through their journey. And so we ended up landing on the word waylight because it was easy to understand. And it also connected to that emotive experience that she personally had. And she wanted to share that with her client base. And then lastly, we built out a style guide and a visual appeal that reflected the environment she wanted to create. So we leaned into, well, first we asked her, what what kind of environment do you want? How do you want people to feel when they walk in? How do you want them to feel when they walk away? And for her, she wanted it to be very tranquil, very calming, and very inspiring in a lot of ways. So we leaned into a style that reflected that. So the lessons learned here is that doing deep research, especially with all those word studies, the brainstorming sessions we went through, all of the interviews that we did with her, it helps strengthen your brand results because it provides clarity on the rest of the pieces. It also defines your audience a little more and defines you as a service provider a little more. And ultimately, it provides a roadmap for your current and future marketing approach. And what I mean by that is if you don't understand what your audience is wanting and you don't understand really what makes you special to your audience, you're going to kind of be all over the place. You're going to be like, okay, let's do this. I think that's cool, that's trendy, or let's change the logo. I'm sick of the logo. Let's change it. Let's switch up the color palette just for this one campaign because we really just think it will look better. You start to have these like very snap, like random decision making just based on inspirations or random exciting things. And for you designers, when you work with clients, you probably experience that often where it's like you feel like you're getting jerked around. But if you have a strong backing of research for what your audience wants and the real goals of your business, it's going to help you craft a whole strategy around that that meets that so that when you start getting a little spun out or a client of yours starts to get a little spun out, you can be like, listen, that's a great idea. I totally see where you're coming from, but this is what our research says. This is where we landed. So this is why we're executing it in this way. So with that said, how can you brand better? How can you, as a small business owner, how can you, as a designer, brand with all of this in mind? The biggest takeaway that I hopefully you have by now is you need to know your audience, which is not as easy as it sounds. A lot of times people want to say everyone is their audience. It's like, who's your audience? It's everybody, like any age, any gender, any location, they can access it. The reality is everyone is not your audience because ultimately, just like in how we form relationships, you probably don't like everybody you meet. That's just the reality of life. And not everybody you meet is going to like you. And it's the same with how you're handling a brand. You have to understand not everyone is going to want or like or appreciate what it is you're offering, but you don't need to worry about those people. All you need to worry about is forming and crafting an identity and a brand that your ideal audience does like, just in the same way as you look for friends or you look for relationships with people that you enjoy spending time with and that you have positive interactions with. It's the same way when you approach branding. So some of the ways that you can get there is you got to do the research. And I really want to emphasize that you have to challenge your assumptions. A lot of times everybody has, certain assumptions or stereotypes in their mind when they think of certain generations or they think of certain audiences. So really challenge those and do in-depth research. What's their basic demographic details? Yes, but what are their desires? What are their aspirations? What do they dislike? What do they like? What do they disagree with? Maybe what's their political leaning even? What's their spending habits? And what social media are they on? Where are the places that they're going to be advertised to, essentially? And then from there, you want to dig a little deeper. So you want to conduct interviews with members of your audience to get some outside opinions. You want to understand how you can really meet the audience's needs and map out different sectors where your audience maybe splits off a little can help, such as, let's say you have an audience that is um, women and they are majority younger Gen Z audience. Let's say young women who are Gen Z. Some of them are really into music and some of them are really into sports. And so looking at all the different nuances of your audience will help you not only niche down a little more, but it will help you really understand what the real values are of that audience. And then lastly, consider how you can incorporate a human-centered positive approach. So what is something in your business that you can get that one-on-one connection with your audience, whether it's crafting an event where like you're there and you're meeting people and you're engaging with people, or maybe you have a representative for your company who goes out and networks for you or interacts with people for you. Maybe there are ways that you're interacting online that are very real and very organic and you're sharing knowledge. There are lots of ways that you can keep things human and keep that connection going with your audience. And then I just have two more points here. One being after you dig deeper, and so you've done the research, you've dug into it a little more. Now you need to figure out your story. What is the story that you want to tell? What story do you want people to understand when they are interacting with your business or interacting with your brand? And to do that, you'll have to ask a couple questions, such as how now can your business meet your audience's desires and aspirations that you've mapped out more clearly? What values does your business have in common with your audience? So now you're starting to draw those connectors. You have your audience all mapped out here, and hopefully you've got your business enough figured out. But if not, you can always take time to ask the same questions about your business, map that out with a little more clarity, and then start drawing those connections of what are the values that I have that my audience needs? What are the desires that my audience have that I can meet? Why would my audience want to buy from me versus my competitors? You're starting to make those connection points between the audience and you. And that's starting to really craft out a brand identity that is distinct. And then the last thing is you put all the pieces together. So you've done that in-depth research, you've drawn your connections, you have both sides mapped out clearly. Now you can start getting into all the final deliverables and all the final pieces that you need to really make that brand stand out. A lot of times that's a brand guide that's a little more fleshed out. So that's when you can start picking color palettes, start picking the logo, start figuring out what photography you want. I personally would say you need to ditch the stock photos because you want, again, you want that human centered, positive approach. You want it to feel real. So having original photography makes all the difference. Getting together a really distinct, comprehensive website so that when someone visits you, they're like, I know what this guy does and he has what I need. So you have it all outlined very clearly there, and it's very easy to understand for the user. You want to make sure all your messaging really resonates and have strong copywriting that is emotive. And then lastly, you want to craft and consider how you can create more engaging branded experience, like an event or a community involvement initiative. How can you start physically getting in front of your ideal audience with everything that you have now behind you, so that when people see you, they're like, oh, I know that guy. He does XYZ, and I love his brand because he helps me with this, or he is just like a cool guy. I want to be like that. There's just lots of ways that you can really start to build out the visual presence so that people really feel that connection on the other end. So that concludes today's webinar. I would encourage you guys to check out the rest of the series because Pat and Regina will be following up with tons of insights into marketing and event strategy. And if you are interested in chatting with any of us and getting more insight on your strategies, you can contact Pat or I, and you can find us at poeticamarketing.com to learn a little more about what we do. Okay, now that we've kind of gone through everything, I was curious if you guys had any questions. Feel free. I believe there is a Q&A option on here. You could use that or use the chat, whatever is easiest for you. If there's anything that you want me to go back through, feel free. Just whatever thoughts you have, questions, insights.
Nicole, I'll throw you a curveball
Okay.
as people fill in some answers. But one of the challenges that I've seen for small business owners, especially those who work alone, is sometimes they'll start a business and they won't name the business after themselves. So like Poetica, and
Right.
then they might be a one person shop and they go have to go out and do sales, and sometimes it feels like they're kind of trying to build two brands at once. They have like their personal brand and then the like company entity brand as well. How do you sort of navigate building those two entities at once, and is there or should there be some sort of separation between the qualities of those two brands?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and that is often where a lot of people start out for sure. I would say in the beginning, I would focus more on the personal brand and really getting to know yourself and what you're offering as a service, especially if you're specifically offering a service or product that is dependent on you. Because the first interaction that people are going to have is going to be you. So I would say starting off with that personal branding is actually very helpful, but you want to not get carried away in the sense that now the product is secondary. So it is kind of like a married thing in the beginning. And once you have enough out there that, it's really the product's able to kind of live on its own now, then you can start building out that separate story with more clarity because through those personal interactions that you're having, it's helpful to start storing in the back of your mind what your audience is saying about the product and what the audience is wanting with your product. And you're really starting to basically collect that initial research for that product's personal, like, or that product's branding or the services branding. So I would say I think it's good to start first with you, and then as research starts to collect and you really are getting a better sense of your own product, then you can start really giving it a life of its own and shaping it in the exact way that you know is going to appeal with your audience because you've already spent the time building relationships with them.
Love that. Thank you. And we did have a question in the
Yes.
Q&A. Somebody said, I have been stuck at putting together a logo.
Ooh, okay. What are you stuck with particularly? Is it create like figuring out what you want the logo to be? Is it figuring out, the visual style of the logo? I'm curious, like what specifically is the hold up with it?
And while they're typing that out, we had another question. I am a one-person business. How do I drive
Mhm.
engagement and gather that research?
Oh, that is a big question. No worries. Bye, Esther. Um, I would say, oh, one, you need strategy for sure. You definitely need to start with, like I said before, kind of what makes you distinct and what your audience is looking for. So I would start with kind of what I was saying in the research phase of really getting to know your audience. And you can start with some assumptions and then challenge them. So it's okay to kind of start with, I think my audience is maybe in the 18 to 24-year range. And I think what they're looking for is maybe, a specific style of product, and then just start challenging, start honestly go on Google and be like, is Gen Z interested in this product? What are they doing in their day to day? What do they value? There's so many studies out there that give you super specific demographics or demographic details about all kinds of generations, all kinds of age ranges. So you really kind of want to get into those research studies and start to see what is the truth about your audience and then challenging what you assume about them. And once you find out what the truth is about them and where they're going, what they're looking for, what they're desiring, what are their needs, then you can start building out a strategy that is effective for them. So if it's Gen Z and you find out Gen Z is all on TikTok, and that's an assumption I have, but might not necessarily be true. But if all Gen Z is on TikTok, then you might be like, okay, like we're going to use TikTok as our engagement strategy, and we're going to start crafting content that Gen Z is interacting with on TikTok. And that might be human centered content where it's a person standing there. It might be more engaging visuals, and the research will start to reveal that to you as you really start asking questions and finding research studies that either back or dismiss those questions. Oh, so for the logo, it feels incomplete, the visual style. One thing again is to first get a really good sense of, honestly, first your audience and also your product, and try to look into what kind of visual styles are appealing to that audience. If it feels incomplete, that could be a visual specific problem. It's hard to know without like seeing it sometimes, but I would say if it's missing something, it could be a design element isn't fitting right, or maybe you're kind of doing one of those things where it's like you're fitting a round peg into a square hole where you have a concept but it's not fully fleshed out yet. I often find when I'm struggling with logo designs, it's because I started doing something that I wanted to do. And then I was like, wait, this is not at all what they asked me for or what is really going to work for what they're doing. And when things feel incomplete, it's often because there's just a piece missing that I'm personally missing about that particular product. I don't maybe understand it fully or fully understand the audience, and then I have to go ask questions. Or if there's a, and sometimes that's just asking the business owner, like, hey, like, can you just sit down with me and talk through your, like, what your service or product is a little more? Like, I have a couple questions and I want to make sure I really understand it. And really getting into those details so that when you're building the logo, it's truly reflective of the experience or the product itself. Hopefully that's helpful. Elaine said, how do you go about getting valuable information from clients who have no idea what direction they want their brand to go in? Oh, that is also a great question. So that actually is probably one of the biggest questions I find myself running into as a designer. I think a lot of designers can relate with. It's like, okay, I'm asking the client questions, and even maybe the person who was saying about the logo feeling incomplete, maybe you're in this scenario too, where you're asking questions from the business owner and they're not really giving you a lot of clarity. There could be a few reasons why that is. One, the business owner actually themselves does not understand their own product or service. Sometimes that does happen. And in those cases, I would say it's not your job to figure it out, but it helps to try and dig around cross relational partners of the owner. So asking maybe the service providers, if it's a bigger business, asking other people in the company who are providing the service to get questions from them or get answers from them, or asking the owner, hey, could I talk to one of your, oh, what's the word? One of your clients or one of your buyers or customers. And can I just talk with them and hear what their experience was with your product or service and get a little more in depth on how that worked for them? So if there are areas that the business owner themselves are not seeing, it's probably because they aren't doing that research. So it's helpful to then go and do your own through other means. But if you do that, make sure you're properly compensated because you don't want to just go off doing research for a business owner, on your own and whatnot. But um, it does help to look at other areas or members of the business that could give you insight.
Any other questions before we wrap up today?
I think we're good.
All right, well, perfect. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Oh, we got
Oh,
uh,
oh, Lauren. Oh, I'm
right.
so glad you enjoyed the webinar, Lauren. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, for joining. Feel free to sign up for the next two webinars, and hopefully we'll see you all again next week.